Welcome to the Calumet Roundtable. I'm your host, Tom Roach, and I'm joined today by my usual co-host, and today my guest, Dr. Lee Artz. Lee has written to some extent about political cartoons, and we thought we might talk today about Charlie Hebdo and what this means and where this might take us. So, Lee, would you like to get started by telling us, are these political cartoons that Charlie Hebdo is publishing? Is this more generic satire? Where do you see it?
Well, I think we probably should start just by making the caveat that the murder of the cartoonist at Hebdo should be condemned, and we have to say that any response with public debate or discussion can't end in murder. So, and I think if we look at Charlie Hebdo, it's a little bit different than some of the research I did on the political cartoons during the Gulf War and the U.S. invasion, because most of those cartoons were overtly political, overtly direct, and they were in some respects satirizing Saddam Hussein, but more importantly, they were trying to make a political statement about what policy should be and expressing an opinion. The Hebdo cartoons that are on the front page certainly fall into that category because they're political cartoons. And I would say if we look at Charlie Hebdo as journalists, we should be clear that we're not talking about people that are reporting on the news or covering their news, but these are people that actually are engaged in the public debate and have an opinion. They just happen to be expressing it through a cartoon.
Well, so there's a difference though, right? Because it seems to me there's two types of satire, right? There's satirical political views. Jonathan Swift's A Modest Proposal is, is an early example of this 200 years ago. And he suggests that, and he's trying to point out how the Irish Catholics are being mistreated, essentially, right? And so he makes the satirical point that, well, they could be selling their children for food and they'd make some money and they'd, decrease their debt. That had a very strong political point behind it. I don't see a political point behind pictures of religious figures in the nude or engaging in sexual acts or something like that. How do you see that?
Well, I think I don't know, maybe in the last few decades, the whole role of comedy and satire and humor has taken on a meaner edge, for lack of a better word, a meaner edge. So oftentimes the humor isn't directed to enlighten or to move a conversation forward as much as it is to take a particular shot and score a point. In this case, Charlie Hebdo in particular was held up as this the epitome of satire in France because they skewered everybody, kind of like we might have thought Bill Maher or Jon Stewart did.
However, I think, and Stewart to some extent too, had more of a deliberate political edge to them. I don't know that I'd classify this that close to them, but maybe we should. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know if we can categorize it. I haven't got to that point where you can say we can put these in different categories. Certainly the humor that was supposed to go with Hebdo had a political message in it because they claimed, again, to skewer Christianity, Judaism, Islam. But I think if you look at the Hebdo cartoons, at least that were on the front page in recent times, were although they claimed to attack everybody equally, it seemed to be an emphasis on attacking Islam in particular. And in the context of African immigrants who, by and large, were Islam, the debate in France about immigration had the overtones of also a debate about Islam. And so when the cartoons are about Muhammad or the Prophet or Boko Haram, it might have appeared on the surface to be a discussion about religion, but in essence, it was a discussion about what kind of country we want to have and who we're going to satire now.
Okay, so I'm seeing a picture here of of something that starts out as sort of a celebration of free speech in a liberal sense, right? That's ending up with a message that's actually very conservative and hurtful and harmful potentially, right? Is that what you're saying? Is that?
Yeah, I'm saying that we can't look at the satire outside the context of what was going on in France or Europe at the time. I mean, this follows on the heels of the primary Danish newspaper going on a campaign that said that they basically told in the pages that people from the Middle East better watch what they say and better watch what they do because they're now under attack. In the context of where in France it's illegal to talk about or to question the Holocaust or to talk about or to satire.
Well, Charles de Gaulle, right? I mean, the magazine got shut down at one point because they were making fun of Charles de Gaulle shortly after he died, right?
And they fired a journalist about a year ago because the journalist had a cartoon that was criticizing Israel, the state of Israel. So,
but they do something harsher with an Islamic figure, and they can get away with that.
It's not the same thing because it didn't have the same consequence or the events. But I remember when Bill Maher was talking with the first Gulf War, and Bush's press secretary came on and told Bill Maher and all Americans to watch what they say. Nobody said that to Maher in the last 6 months because he has taken it as his personal vendetta to expose Islam for the reactionary religion that he claims it is. And Hebdo was that way too.
But I see a political context to what Maher's doing.
Well, certainly, and I would say it's the same context of what Hebdo is doing, a generalized assault by Western governments against Islam as responsible for all things bad, that we're going to blame Islam and the religion of Islam for beheadings, or we're going to blame Islam for terrorism, or we're going to blame Islam for the general attack on freedoms that we understand in the civilized West. So in that sense, Maher's part of that, but so was Hebdo.
Yeah, but I think there's a difference there. Let's go back to skewer for a second, right? We're talking about skewering these people. And if we take Jonathan Swift's Modest Proposal, it was called, right? Yeah. He wasn't just skewering the British, right? He was poking fun at them in an effort to make a point that was going to, in his mind, make the world a better place, right? It was going to correct a problem.
Yeah, I think.
Okay, and I think Maher's doing that too, right? I mean,
there's a big difference between Maher.
He doesn't want people to be shut down on TV because they take a stand against the government on a war, right? And I think the comment that got him into trouble was we talked about the bravery of people who would be suicide bombers, and we're sort of getting back to a different discussion. An opposite issue, though, right? But an opposite issue. So if he comes out and digs into somebody or something, right? I mean, to me, that's got a context that says, we have to have a right to speak up and not be shut down by
and I agree totally. But
the
my thing is that's not Bill Maher anymore. That's Bill Maher of the past. He has been tamed. He has been tamed.
Okay.
Now his free speech is on question because his free speech only attacks those that are the most vulnerable, only attacks Islam. Okay. And Hebdo, I would say, did the same thing. Instead of attacking power, instead of attacking Christianity or the French government, they turn their attacks on Algerian immigrants. They turn their attacks on people in burqas. They turn their attacks on the Islamic people that can't speak for themselves because they don't have access to the media the way Hebdo did. The difference for me is the satire and its roots, political roots in satire, was always to skewer the rich, to make claims about what is in our interest.
Right.
It's easy to criticize, right? I mean, what's a guy? Andrew Dice Clay made fun of blacks, made fun of Hispanics, made fun of Irish, and lots of people would laugh at that. But that laughter reinforced power and inequality. Hebdo was trying to claim their satire was opening up a fight for democracy and freedom, but they had drifted in the last year and a half or two to almost exclusively picking on immigrants and immigrant messages and immigrant stories. I don't know if we have time before we go to break.
Well, let's just explore it for a second. I mean, how intentional do you think that was? I mean, one of the things I just want to point out, their circulation doubled and tripled and quadrupled at various times when they took on these issues.
Yeah, the biggest time it increased was after they were killed.
Had they found a vein here that they were mining? In which case this is all profit-driven, right? Or were they really trying to represent a conservative political perspective?
I think that they're
in 1 minute, yes.
Yeah, I mean they had this aura of being liberal, but under that aura of being liberal, they had used their power and their pens to critique the most vulnerable people, I would say, in French society. The immigrants, particularly the African immigrants, the unemployed, those that were kind of not French enough. And it was easy to criticize, as it would be easy to criticize in this country by somebody that doesn't like Obama,
Right.
to criticize the black community or the thugs or hip-hop music or something like that.
And I think what lends more gravity to your argument is the reaction of the French government, right? Because they put more police on the street, and there was a high school student who was arrested.
Yes.
For,
I think we have that. Maybe they can show it to the viewers.
But he essentially used the same cover.
The same cover that had Muhammad holding a Quran and said, "The Quran won't save me," and there were bullets coming through it. Well, the high school student took one with Charlie Hebdo instead of the Quran.
So Charlie Hebdo's on the cover.
Charlie Hebdo can't save me. And he was arrested for fomenting or supporting terrorism as a teenager.
Yeah. Was this an underground newspaper? What was this? Was it a poster?
I think it was posted on Facebook. He just kind of did his own version. But yeah, he was arrested. One of the major...
Talk about Big Brother watching, right?
One of the major satirists, Dewey Done, I don't know if I'm pronouncing this right, was also arrested and jailed for making a critique. He basically said, "I am not Charlie." There was a big outcry afterwards, "Je suis Charlie," right?
Yeah.
I'm Charlie, and he said, "I'm not Charlie." He got arrested for saying he wasn't Charlie. Students have been arrested and their parents have been arrested for refusing to make a moment of silence in honor of the three cartoonists. So if you don't stand in a moment of silence, you're violating law in France.
Yeah, and and the other thing that I just think is odd about that is, how can a satirist be a martyr? I mean, essentially what you're doing is you make fun of people for posturing. Right, and here I kind of wonder if there isn't some posing going on, if they're trying to, I mean, certainly, anyone who's killed, it's a regrettable, action, but a martyr is somebody who died for a cause, right? Who put themselves at risk for a political issue that was bigger than than they were, right? And I just don't see that element here.
Well, the claim is, and it's in the New York Times, and it was in that march of hundreds of thousands in Paris. The claim was the cause was free speech, to defend this inalienable right to free speech, and the terror attack or the murder was an attempt to squash free speech. So we all need to rally around this emblem of free speech. And I think we're probably, I don't know how much time we have.
Yeah, well, I think we're just about out of time. But, I mean, I think that's a good thing to do, to rally around an emblem of free speech. The question is, which emblem do you want to rally around?
And why this one became
and why this one.
Yes.
Okay, we're going to take a quick commercial break. The Calumet Roundtable will be right back. Welcome back to the Calumet Roundtable. I'm your host, Tom Roach, and my guest today is Dr. Lee Artz. We're continuing our discussion about Charlie Hebdo and free speech and satire and martyrdom and some of those things. Lee, we were just talking about people rallying around a cause here for free speech. And maybe Charlie Hebdo isn't the ideal symbol of free speech. What are some other examples of people being shut down or persecuted because of free speech?
Yeah, I think we should understand why Charlie Hebdo becomes this big rallying point, because heads of state across Europe, across the world, all gathered in Paris, and Paris, the newspapers and the general public relations campaign to stir up French patriotism and support of free speech, and everybody from Netanyahu to I think just about everybody head of state except Obama showed up for the demonstration. So obviously it becomes a newsworthy event and things spiral from there. But leaving aside that we need to condemn the killing of the Charlie Hebdo people, I think
which we do, of course.
Of
yes.
course, but we put this in some context. Last year, 8 journalists were killed in Honduras. 3 were killed in France. France becomes a rallying cry. The 8 journalists in Honduras aren't. 100 journalists have been killed in Mexico, executed in the last decade. Just this week in Egypt, the Egyptian government shot citizens. They have arrested journalists. The official policy of the Saudi government is anybody that insults the king can be imprisoned for up to 5 years. There's been hundreds of journalists killed in many countries. In the Ukraine, there's been 6 journalists killed since the fighting began. But there isn't this sudden response, well, protect the journalists, protect free speech. It's interesting that one would choose Charlie Hebdo. And I would argue the reason it's chosen is because the perpetrators can be pointed to as being Islamist terrorists.
Plus it's France, of course.
Well, it's France, but at the same time, in Greece, which is also in Europe, last year Golden Dawn assassinated a rap artist because they didn't like his lyrics. I don't know if cartoons have more value than
maybe
music.
they just have better taste. I don't know.
But Golden Dawn, there was not a response. Let's make sure that the Greek Orthodox Church and we weed out the terrorists of the Greek Orthodox Church. Or in the Ukraine, we find all the Orthodox Christians that are involved in this.
As we speak,
you choose one to make a claim about free speech, but you ignore the other ones that are, again, there's 100 journalists killed in Mexico, right here on this continent, and there has been very few arrests and even fewer convictions.
Okay, so the implication is this isn't just about free speech, right?
I would argue it's part of the larger US-led global war on terror. It provides a convenient foil for saying, look, those Islamists don't support free speech. They're easily offended. This is the kind of, and Bill Maher and other senators joins into that conversation.
Because he's been co-opted. You heard it here first, everybody.
I think he willingly participates. The point is that you have selectively chosen one instance of free speech to rally behind, not because you're concerned about free speech. And France illustrates that. I mean, the immediate thing they did, as you said at the top, they put thousands of troops on the streets. They arrested teenagers for posting things on Facebook. They arrested other satirists for satirizing Charlie Hebdo. They've arrested people for making statements that were too challenging to the state of Israel. So what they have done is, like was done in Vietnam, to save this village, we have to destroy it. The claim is, well, to save free speech, we're going to shut down free speech. Now, obviously, nobody notices that if the free speech you have fits the needs of the government or fits the needs of the global war on terror, you seem to have the ability to say whatever you want because you're not saying anything that's challenging that.
Well, and I get that, but I think it's worth pointing out that a lot of times when things make the news, it's because they're at a conjunction of several different isures that are
Charlie
of interest,
Hebdo would not have made the news if the French government and the U.S. government.
So Charlie Hebdo is kind of an interesting persona here. There's of course the killings. There's the connection with with making fun of Islam and things like that. So from a journalistic standpoint, I can see why it's getting coverage. That doesn't surprise me. But when you have foreign leaders showing up to show support, then that's a decision somebody's making to put more emphasis on something, and it makes it almost impossible for journalists not to cover it. So I think there's a lot of things at play here, but some of them seem to be a little bit deliberate. I mean, I can really see your point. Well, so we think about the bigger issue of free speech. If we look back at the United States, some incidents we're more familiar with here. What are some other more recent examples of people getting shut down here?
We want to be careful not to do a whole history of free speech.
Well, I know.
And
you have to attend our classes if you want to get the full history here, if you want to get the background. Let's hit the top.
Because we could talk about the Palmer raids and the quieting of the labor movement, the socialist movement in the 20s and in the 40s.
Yeah.
But
that lecture is going to cost you folks. But what about the Dixie Chicks? Yeah.
Well, the Dixie Chicks are a good example. Dixie Chicks were, I guess you'd call them a country pop female band and had quite a following. They went to London to some big concert, and I don't remember which one of the lead singer, I guess, said, I'm ashamed I'm from the same state as the president, George Bush, which was understood to be an anti-war statement. When they came back to this country, Clear Channel, which owns 1,400 radio stations, set out the order that the Dixie Chicks will not be played on the air. And the DJs, and I know the DJs in Atlanta and some of the other cities, did a little thing where they publicly stomped on the CDs from the Dixie Chicks and made very sexist, very disturbing remarks about the Dixie Chicks. But the point is, the Dixie Chicks couldn't make one off-the-cuff remark without having them be silenced.
Right. Another example from the music arena is John Lennon makes the comment about the Beatles being more popular than Christ to an interviewer in England about 2-3 months before they get to the United States, but when they get to the U.S., somebody publicizes this in a U.S. newspaper, and it spreads around the country. And the next thing you know, people are banning their records, and they're having burn your Beatle records rallies in the South. They actually, can you imagine? They actually canceled a couple of Beatles concerts. I mean, today people would pay thousands of dollars for tickets to go back and sit in on one of those.
And sometimes we have to admit that the artists may do that just to get publicity, like when Madonna.
But Lennon didn't. I mean,
no. But I'm saying if you looked at Madonna, and Marianne Faithfull, and the Pope, and the Catholic Church, and Like a Virgin, I mean, it wasn't a political statement. It was more part of a PR statement. But certainly with the Dixie Chicks, it was, and it comes right on the heels of Bush's press secretary saying, watch what you say, and here's the consequence of watching what you say.
Right.
I mean, their career wasn't destroyed, but it certainly took a hiatus for a long period of time.
Yeah, see, and I would argue that the organized effort that put down the Dixie Chicks is more problematic than what happened with Lennon, because the Lennon Beatles thing was sort of spontaneous. But it's interesting that it was people being offended about a comment that they saw denigrated their religion, right?
I would argue in a
Which
democratic...
is what the Hebdo thing is all about, right?
But in a democratic society, you have to expect to be offended, because if you can't be offended, we really are going to have a problem having a conversation, because there are all different kinds of points of view. I would just say that sometimes a point of view goes beyond what most would tolerate. Again, here's a complex one. The Sigma Alpha Epsilon at the University of Oklahoma, or Oklahoma State. I'm sorry, I don't mean to impugn the wrong university, but they were caught on a tape where the fraternity was singing a song with the N-word, and they were going to hang blacks, and they'd never get into membership in the SAE, right? And there was a national outcry.
Pretty
it was
odd song lyric,
it was, and then later they have a Facebook showing of the house mother who's also singing a song using the N-word and hanging blacks, and anyway, it became this huge scandal. And the interesting thing is that the media said, well, this is intolerable, this is racist. The national organization pulled the charter from the local chapter. The university expelled two of the students.
So I agree with that. So why don't you shut down Charlie Hebdo?
Well,
right?
yeah. The question for me is that the proper response? Is that the proper response? I think there's a difference between the people singing the song, as racist as it is, and actions that are racist that would disallow blacks into the university. But my point here is, they did not respond to Charlie Hebdo's racist magazine articles. I hope they have one. We have one to show them that has a picture of several pregnant women on the front cover of Charlie Hebdo, and it says, Boko Haram mothers complain they aren't going to get their welfare checks. This was after the girls were kidnapped by Boko Haram, and this is supposed to be satire. And you're supposed to laugh. It's like laughing at a rape joke or an AIDS death, or in this case, abduction of small children. That goes beyond, in my mind, satire, and it goes into the realm of the Sigma Alphas singing a song that is overtly racist, that has real political consequence. And so that's the bizarre thing for me, that Hebdo gets to this level.
Okay, and just as a kind of a way to wrap up here, I want to maybe talk about 2 points here. One is why free speech is important, right? And historically, it's publicity and awareness of what's going on that makes it possible for people to be involved in government and to participate in voting and things like that. And so we say you have to have information, you have to have publicity, you have to have free speech before you can have democracy. And then the second important point, it seems to me, is that, and I don't know that this is a defensible point all the time, but the point that's often made is you can't protect some free speech without protecting all free speech, because who are you going to let decide what's acceptable and what isn't? So with that, with those 2 points in mind, you get someone like Lenny Bruce, right?
Well,
look at going back to the history of this, right? You get somebody like Lenny Bruce testing these laws in New York and places that said that you can't use the F word and you can't talk about certain kinds of sexual situations and things. And Lenny Bruce, and I was around when that was going on. I mean, he at the time felt like, and I think a lot of us felt like, he was really doing something that was politically relevant when he did that.
He wanted to use the F word. But let's not talk about Lenny Bruce.
Well, but here we are, right, with a similar issue, right?
But no, it's not a similar issue. But let's not talk about, I want to talk about free speech. Because the argument is,
you've got 10 seconds.
The thing to solve free speech is to have more speech. The problem is, in this society in the West, in France and the United States, most of us don't have access to speak. Hebdo had a special responsibility, a special opportunity. By and large, the marginalized people, working class, blacks, Hispanics in this country, African immigrants in that country, don't have access to speech, so their voices aren't heard. And oftentimes what happens is antisocial responses. So the solution to free speech would be more free speech, but there should be some equal time for those people that want to speak.
Speaking of equal time, we're out of time. Our equal time is out. That's all the time we have for the program. Thank you for joining us today on the Calumet Roundtable. Good day.